Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Welcome back to the Core Women Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Porschia Parker-Griffin, founder and CEO of Fly High Coaching. As a top leadership and career coach, Porschia helps organizations unlock the full potential of their teams through coaching, training, and strategy. With a master's in industrial organizational psychology and a toolkit that includes certifications in Hogan, MBTI, and energy leadership, she's a powerhouse in the business of professional growth. From boosting company culture to helping leaders achieve clarity, her work has been featured in outlets like LinkedIn News and FlexJobs. Get ready to soar with insight on leadership, retention, and what it really takes to engage top talent in today's workplace. Welcome, Porschia.
Thank you so much for having me, Summer. I am super excited to be here and to chat with you.
I am excited to have you on the show as well. So let's jump right into this. But before we get into your professional journey, if you could describe your life to this point in one word, what would that word be and why?
You know, the first word that comes to mind for me is resilience. And I just think in not only my personal life, but in my professional life, resilience has been so important from, graduating from college and moving cross country to California to, being voluntold one day at work that I'm going to be in sales and sell financial consulting services and doing that and selling millions of dollars for a company, that mental resilience to be in sales. And then, deciding to start my own business at 25, to have that resilience to start the business and still be going at this point. I think resilience would be that word to key in on.
Yeah, I love how you talk about that emotional and physical resilience, right? And how you can do that. That is actually a skill. And a lot of people can't flex that way, can't adjust that way. It feels really uncomfortable to be voluntold. And I really haven't heard that word since the military. My husband was in the Marine Corps for 21 years, and they were always voluntold.
Yep.
So you had to adjust quickly, and you learned that. How did you learn that?
Well, I think honestly, when I first learned it was probably with my parents. And so my dad had a phrase and he would tell us this. We would say, "Oh, Dad, I want to do this," or "I want to go to the store, I want to do whatever." And he would say, "Make it happen." That was
Mm,
his answer for everything. So I learned, okay, if I want to go to the store, I have to put my shoes on, I have to get my jacket, I have to be ready when he wants to leave, and then just iterations of that make it happen. And so I think that was really a key moment when it comes to resilience. And then I also started playing basketball when I was like in third grade. And as I'm sure you know, sports will teach you resilience, right? You're going to shoot the basketball thousands of times, right? And they're not all going to go in. And so
right.
you've got to keep shooting, right? You're going to make mistakes, but you've got to keep playing through that. So I think that as a child, those are probably my earliest instances of really flexing that resilience muscle, to your point.
I love that. Thank you for that example because it's so important to be able to get back up, to keep going, to make it happen, getting on your shoes, getting on that jacket, being ready, right? And if things change, if the plans change, being able to shift. And so you've learned that over time, both personally and professionally. So before I get into more of your professional journey, it's interesting what your dad told you in regards to make it happen and how you interpreted that as a young child as well as an adult. When your dad told you to make it happen, was that a feeling of freedom of sorts because you were able to do it on your terms?
Yes, you are absolutely right. That's the way I interpreted it, was like freedom and then like, hey, I have some power. I can have an impact on getting what I want. and
Yes.
not necessarily just being kind of like a victim of circumstance or, at the effect of. It was like, hey, I can have an impact on this. And yes, that's exactly how I interpreted it.
I absolutely love that. And what a great lesson to give your child that room, that ability to grow within their own decision-making process, right? And learn how to respond versus react because they allowed for that and they created that safe space. So that's awesome. So let's jump into what inspired you to start Fly High Coaching and how has your background in industrial and organizational psychology shaped your approach?
Oh, well, the first part in terms of how I decided to start. I mentioned that I started the business at 25, and the short answer, Summer, was I mentioned I had been in sales and I was getting really burnt out, to be honest. Salespeople, business development people get it. You're making millions of dollars for a company, but I was stressed out, overworked. I had a health scare at 25, and I really decided that if I'm going to be under this amount of pressure, I'm going to one, sell something that I really believe in, right? And so in my mind, that wasn't just making like more VPs of tax rich or CFOs rich or business owners rich off of, I sold tax credit consulting services at the time. It wasn't going to be something like that. It was going to be something more meaningful in my mind, right? And so I had heard about coaching, did some research in it. I said, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. Why have I never heard about this? And, we've got to go back to, 2012-ish when coaching was not mainstream like it is today. From a psychological perspective, I realized, oh my gosh, this is what I always wanted to do, but never knew existed because I'd only heard about the clinical side of, psychology and therapy and counseling from that angle. So got certified and started coaching people, just individuals one-on-one, and started out with career coaching first. And that has evolved. And then by the time I resigned from that last job I had, I thought about, hey, coaching businesses. But to the point of that resilience, I thought, oh my gosh, all the business coaches and consultants I see are 55-year-old men.
Mm,
And I said, who's going to believe me? Right.
mm.
So I had that limiting belief and I let that hold me back for a while until one of the companies that I helped with tax credits, the owner said, and he was an owner in Los Angeles, he said, well, hey, do you do coaching and consulting for companies? Do you do, workshops and trainings for businesses? And I said, sure, I do coaching for companies and workshops and trainings for businesses today, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really that kind of in my mind, that light bulb moment that, hey, people will trust what I have to say, even though I'm quote unquote young, I have business experience. And then to the point of, kind of that more psychological aspect of it, this business owner was a Gen Xer and he was having issues with his millennial employees. And there were quite a few challenges, but high level communication challenges, what I like to call multi-generational communication. And when I saw that, I thought, this could be a really cool place to specialize because my age, right, being a millennial, is not going to be held against me in that I'm too young. People could actually see that as a strength. That was the not so short story, but utilizing all of that to kind of get to today, where I like to say that we help companies cut the cost of turnover and improve the performance of their employees while enhancing their culture. We use psychology and research to dig into, leadership development, employee engagement, turnover, multi-generational communication, conflict resolution, those sorts of things.
Well, that is so needed today. I just read an article in the New York Times about how this particular subject, as you're going in to support companies, is so needed. We have five generations out there in the workforce right now, and there can be things that are getting in the way of that company's mission or a company's mission because of lack of co-innovation, misunderstanding in regards to communication, the lack of co-creation because of the lack of communication, the silos built because of the stereotypes based on the generations. So the things that you're doing right now, they're so important. I'm going to go back to what you were talking about earlier about the gentleman asking you if you did coaching, if you did workshops, and that dialogue that was in your head. Maybe I can't do this or whatever that was, right? That held you back. And it was that person that said, "Do you do this?" And it's funny because I remember being on a book tour for my first book and a man about 70 who sat down with me in a Barnes and Noble and he said, "Tell me about this book." And the title of the book could be very jarring for some people. And it was really interesting that that person and that demographic sat down with me and wanted to know more. By the end of that conversation, he picked up three of those books and said, "I want to get these for my daughters and my granddaughter." And it's like, it was that moment, that aha moment that it was like, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can sell this to A, B, or C. Yes, other people are interested, right? And it was that aha moment that sprung you forward too, to knowing you can do this and you have the credentials, you have the training, you have the insight. I love what you're doing. It is so important. You've helped organizations unlock hidden revenue through talent strategy. How do you identify those blind spots for those companies?
Wow. So that's a big question. And it kind of depends on the organization. One of my favorite ways to start working with an organization is to do what we call an organizational assessment. And it will, change a little bit depending on each organization, but at a high level, we will either facilitate some surveys anonymously or look at surveys that they've already done. Could be, any type of employment survey that they have, a satisfaction survey, could be employee engagement surveys. We look at what they have and or we facilitate some ourselves. I like to do some stakeholder interviews with some key individuals and hear from their perspective what perhaps some pain points are, what's working well, what might not be working so well. And then really looking at, data, what do they have? If it's kind of more on the training side, perhaps leadership development side, we might do an audit of, what programs have they done in the past and look at some of those training materials, look at some of those kind of workflows. Maybe sometimes we look at onboarding workflows. It's really custom, but we'll look at that information and really take all of that in mind, and then we will create an executive presentation, and then also a summary, a written kind of executive summary of what some of our findings are. And I'm sure you see tons of similarities amongst clients with what you do, but usually some of the top challenges revolve around leadership, employee engagement and turnover, and culture. And then as you dig deeper into those areas, some of the solutions might change, right? So for one company, our solution to leadership might be to have some executive coaching programs one-on-one. For another company, the solution to leadership might be some management training for their new managers. For another company, it might be some consulting on what they already have, right? So the solution can change for the client, but we tend to see some patterns over and over again.
Oh, I'm sure you do. And it's so funny. You are a pro at this because my next question was, what are the most common challenges companies face that you're finding? So that was a great segue into that question, and you already answered some of that. Before we touch on that, I do want to go back to something that you said. Things can change, they can shift. Again, going back to those early messages with your dad of get ready, make it happen, right? And you're helping them make it happen. You're helping the customer, the consumer, the business. And it's not just a box program. It's high touch, it's selective in regards to how you're forming it around that assessment, the assessment tools that you're using. And that's so right on point because you know as well as I do by having your degrees in organizational industrial psychology that you don't go into a company or an organization say, okay, this is what you need. And that's why it's so nice not to have a boxed program. This is high touch. This is meeting the actual needs of that company and identifying those blind spots, those gaps, right? So this is lovely. You hold certifications in MBTI, Hogan, and energy leadership. How do these tools elevate leadership effectiveness with teams?
Oh, they do it in quite a few ways. And to your point about IO psychology and having a customized approach. How we use different personality assessments and which assessment to even use also depends on the organization. But, at a high level, these assessments can be used in a one-to-one capacity, right? So leadership development, training development for an individual. Maybe they take the assessment and they work with a coach one-on-one on some key areas that are coming up. Many of the assessments have 360 components, right? Where you can get some feedback from their coworkers, perhaps their clients, people technically above them in the hierarchy of the organization, direct reports. So self-awareness for an individual is one way. Also from the team perspective, right? So, in IO psychology, we spend a lot of time thinking about the individual, the team, and then the organization as a whole, right? And how what you do at each level impacts the other, degrees of the whole kind of organization. So at the team level, right, you can look at different personality assessments and assess a whole team. So you can think of everyone's personality assessments from the lens of, hey, what are the strengths of this team? And then what are some blind spots of this team, right? When we take everyone's results on the team into totality, right? And then from there, you can think about the organization as a whole, right? And the different teams and departments that make up an organization. So that is my way of saying there are a lot of ways to use assessments.
Yes.
As you could probably tell, I'm an assessment nerd. I could talk about them all day. They're very interesting and thrilling to me. But again, not a one size fits approach there either. I love what you said about really being targeted as a, boutique firm. That is what we do. We go in, we don't have cookie cutter solutions for every organization. Sure, there's patterns and sure, there are things that we've worked on before that we can pull in, but we want to make sure that we're taking a unique organization in mind and really adapting to what their goals are.
Here's something else I really appreciate. Thank you for that answer, by the way. That's a very thorough answer. I love assessments as well. As we go into these companies, we don't just jump in and say, this is what you got to do, like you would with kind of a box program, right? It's something that we take these assessments. We are nerds in assessments, and I like that. It's okay. It's great because it tells us a bit more of what we need to know to be able to really help those communities, those organizations, those companies to get their needs met, right? And with their buy-in and their input and with their openness about, hey, yes, this is what we need. There are gaps and our assessments show us. And that's when you provide that report based on those assessments to give a better understanding of what your findings are, right? Being an expert in assessment, it's so important, right? Because we've done it, we know how to do it. And this is what I like. I like that you were trained in psychology, but you also have a knowledge of the difference between psychology and coaching. And there is a line there,
Yes.
right? And I think that many times when I see coaches, I'm like, are you crossing that line, right? And do you have that knowledge base of sorts, right? And so being a doctor of clinical psych, being a coach, there is a line for me too, knowing that yes, I'm integrating psychology into this, but I'm not doing a psychological assessment on those people. I am doing a coaching assessment, right? So there is a difference in how we work with people, and having that knowledge from both perspectives is so key. And I think it's such a value to those companies.
Yeah. I love that. And I love what you said. And just to piggyback on that, one thing that I do for our, business engagements is I personally try to just wear one hat. So in a lot of our engagements, for example, if there's like a consulting component, like I mentioned, perhaps we're going in and we're doing the organizational assessment first that I mentioned. I would kind of wear that consulting hat. And I would have other executive coaches on our team come in and do the one-on-one coaching with the executives, right? So I'm wearing the consulting cap and some other coaches are wearing the coaching cap because I think it's easier for the lines not to get blurred. And then, we know everyone has bias, right? So when you're wearing a lot of hats, it is harder to kind of keep everything clear. So I try to wear just one hat when it comes to our engagements and then have team members help with wearing some of these other hats and we can put it together into a solution.
I really love that. That you are the consultant, you have your facilitators or team members that are doing the coaching. Absolutely love your approach. So, we're going to get to your podcast, Career 101 podcast. Tell us more about this.
So, well, one, I've asked you before, but I want to ask you again in a formal way. We would love to have you on the show in our next
Oh,
recording cycle. So hopefully, Dr. Summer Watson, you can join us and be a guest.
thank you.
Um, but I love to say that when it comes to the Career 101 podcast, we talk about everything you were never taught or told when it comes to career growth, development, and change. And it really started because I saw so many patterns. And at this point in business, I've coached hundreds of people and we've had thousands of clients total. So I saw the same challenges, the same problems coming up over and over and over again. And I hadn't really seen a podcast that kind of addressed them in the way that I think we do. We kind of have a unique spin on a lot of what we do. So that was my final nudge into the podcasting world because I resisted for a while. But really those things that you're not taught or told. A lot of us, if we go to college, you get the degree and then they let you loose. And somehow we're all supposed to know how to navigate our careers. We're all supposed to know how to explore different paths and find the right one. We're supposed to know how to plan and manage our careers. The reality is most of us are never taught that, right? And so getting that information out there was the primary catalyst for the podcast. We also talk about organizational topics too. A lot of our executive clients that are, inside of organizations, they listen in for their teams and get insights. So we talk about, organizational and then even entrepreneurship topics as well. And I think that's the gambit of your career, right? Because your career isn't just one kind of siloed part of your life, right? It's your career, it's leadership, it's, hey, now I'm leading a team and how do I do that? Or maybe I want to start my own thing, or what are some insights for our whole organization? So we do have some broad topics, but we just have a little bit of what I think is kind of the best for people to know.
Oh, so great. That sounds wonderful. And I would absolutely accept your invitation to be a guest. I think we'd have another wonderful conversation, and this has been awesome. So
Thank you.
I've loved this conversation. So as we come to the close of the interview, and we've covered so much thus far, for leaders and entrepreneurs listening today, what's one action they can take right now to improve their workplace culture?
Well, I'm going to go back to something we talked about. I think as a leader, doing some deep work to understand yourself and your team is the first action, right? And I personally think a good way to do that is to take assessments, personality assessments that you trust, right? And so, that's another conversation about reliability and validity of assessments and all of that. But as you know, I'm a proponent of, the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I'm a master practitioner of that. It's a great one. Also, the Hogan assessment is great, and others. But doing that kind of deep work on yourself and then also on your team can really help you to make a shift in your culture.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. What a great tip to leave us with. Thank you, Portia, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you, Summer.
Absolutely. You can follow Portia Parker-Griffin on LinkedIn, on Facebook and YouTube at Fly High Coaching, and at fly-highcoaching.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.